September 21, 2005. A mysterious event in the skies shocked the world. JetBlue Flight 292 took off from Burbank on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. The plane, an Airbus A320, was headed to New York City with 140 passengers and 6 crew members on board. Everything was going smoothly. The engines were humming, the weather was clear, and passengers were settling in for what they thought would be a normal flight. But only moments after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. As the plane climbed higher, the pilots felt something unusual in the cockpit. There was a problem with the landing gear. Normally, the gear retracts smoothly, but this time, it wouldn't move. The crew tried everything they could think of, but no matter what they did, the nose gear stayed stuck. Worse, it wasn't just stuck, it was locked at a dangerous angle, pointing 90 degrees to the left instead of straight. What happens when everything goes wrong at 30,000 feet? The shocking truth about a terrifying in-flight emergency. At first, it might have seemed like a small issue, something they could fix quickly, but the truth was far more serious. Without being able to retract the nose gear, the plane might not be able to land safely. With over 140 lives at risk, the situation couldn't have been more critical. What started as a normal flight had suddenly turned into an emergency. The crew contacted air traffic control to report the problem. Now, the only focus was survival. The question was, how would they get the plane back on the ground safely? The world was watching as the aircraft climbed higher, and the stakes grew even higher, but what happened next shocked everyone, on board and on the ground. It was supposed to be a simple flight, just another trip from Burbank to New York, but as JetBlue Flight 292 climbed higher into the sky, the crew faced an unexpected and serious problem. At first, everything seemed fine. Passengers were seated with seat belts fastened, the crew was following normal procedures, and the plane hummed along smoothly, but then something unusual happened. In a split second, a simple flight turned into a nightmare. But what exactly went wrong, and how did the crew react? The pilots tried to retract the landing gear, a step that usually happens automatically after takeoff. This time, however, there was a problem. The landing gear wouldn't retract. At first, the pilots thought it might just be a small glitch, something that would fix itself, but no matter how many times they tried, the gear refused to move. That's when they realized the problem was far worse than they had expected. The nose gear wasn't just stuck, it was stuck sideways. Instead of pointing straight, it was locked at a dangerous angle, 90 degrees to the left. For a moment, the pilots were stunned. This wasn't a small issue they could ignore. It was a serious malfunction that put everyone on board at risk. The crew immediately contacted air traffic control and reported the issue. The situation was becoming more tense by the second. They knew this wasn't something they could fix while flying. Every decision from this moment on could mean the difference between life and death, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the real challenge was about to begin. As the reality of the situation sank in, the pilots of JetBlue Flight 292 faced a critical choice. Should they try to land at Long Beach Airport, or should they head to Los Angeles International Airport, LAX? Both choices were risky, and the pressure was building fast. The crew worked with air traffic control to evaluate the situation. The plane was still flying, but the problem with the landing gear remained unsolved. The nose gear, stuck sideways, made a normal landing at Long Beach almost impossible. Long Beach had shorter runways than LAX, and with the landing gear in such a dangerous position, they couldn't take that risk. Turning back to Burbank was another option, but it wasn't ideal either. The airport was too close to the ocean and didn't have the safety equipment needed for an emergency landing. That left LAX as the best and only choice. Its long, wide runways offered the highest chance of a. Just when it seemed like they had a solid plan, a new and unexpected challenge appeared: the waiting game. Fuel burn and tension in the skies. As JetBlue Flight 292 circled in the sky, the tension in the cockpit was intense. The pilots had decided LAX was the safest place to land, but now the most important job was burning off enough fuel to make the landing safer. There were still over 21,000 kilograms of fuel on board, and landing with so much weight could cause a dangerous fire if the plane hit the ground too hard. Waiting was their only option. For more than 2 hours, the plane flew in slow, wide figure-8 patterns over the ocean. This helped burn as much fuel as possible. The crew closely watched the fuel levels, the engines, and the landing gear. But as time passed, the uncertainty grew. No one could say for sure how this would end. Inside the cabin, the passengers were starting to feel the stress. Many had heard the announcement that the landing gear was stuck. Some were glued to their phones, watching live news reports about the emergency. What if they hadn't burned enough fuel? What if the plane was still too heavy? What if the landing gear couldn't handle the landing? Time was running out. With every passing moment, their options were shrinking. The plane had to land soon, or the consequences could be severe. The calm before the storm. After hours of circling, the pilots of JetBlue Flight 292 were ready to make their move. They had burned off enough fuel, and LAX was within reach. Emergency teams were already on standby, prepared for the worst. But despite all the planning, one terrifying question still hung in the air. Would the plane hold together on landing? The aircraft had been through a lot already. With the nose wheel stuck in a dangerous sideways position, the crew wasn't sure what kind of landing awaited them. The situation was unclear. Every plan they had made depended on the gear holding together, and that was far from guaranteed. The pilots could only hope they had enough control to make the landing as smooth as possible. But even then, they knew it might not be enough. As the plane drew closer to LAX, the tension in the cockpit grew. They weren't just pilots anymore. They were also firefighters, doctors, and counselors all at once. Every decision was a matter of life and death. The cockpit voice recorder caught the voices of the crew, calm but tense, as they coordinated with air traffic control and reviewed every possible scenario. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers were watching their own drama unfold on live TV. News outlets were broadcasting the story, following their flight's every move. The plane was circling in the sky, and the world was watching, wondering if this would be an aviation disaster. The fear among the passengers was real. Would they make it? Was this going to be the kind of tragedy we read about in history books? The crew had prepared for an emergency landing, and the emergency teams at LAX were ready, but the real test was still ahead. The moment of truth was getting closer with every second. The passengers could only sit and wait, holding their breath as the plane descended toward the runway. But as the plane neared the runway, something unexpected happened. The landing gear wasn't reacting the way they thought. What would this mean for the final moments of this tense flight? Would they be able to land safely? Or was disaster waiting just beyond the horizon? The tense landing, sparks and flames. The moment they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. After hours of circling, the aircraft was now descending toward LAX. The emergency teams were ready on standby, and the pilots focused on landing the plane safely. But the risk was far from over. The nose gear, still stuck sideways, was their biggest challenge. As the wheels touched down on runway 25L, the plane's speed quickly picked up. Almost immediately, the pilots could feel the pressure. The nose gear was dragging along the runway, sparking and creating flames as it scraped the asphalt. The sounds were loud and frightening, reminding everyone how fragile their safety had become. The crew had trained for emergencies like this. They knew the procedure. The goal was to keep the nose of the plane off the ground as long as possible, so the wheels could absorb the shock without damaging the landing gear. But the tension was unbearable. With every second that passed, the danger grew. Would they be able to stop the plane in time? The aircraft was going faster than they wanted, and the nose gear was still sparking, sending flashes of fire and heat across the tarmac. Every pilot's worst fear was happening. In the cockpit, the crew stayed calm, but knew how high the seconds felt like hours. The aircraft's speed slowly began to decrease, but it was a delicate balance. Any sudden move could send the plane into a dangerous skid. The pilots knew every action mattered. It felt like the plane would never stop. The distance between them and the end of the runway seemed to shrink too slowly. And then, just when it felt like there was no room left, the plane came to a stop, just 1,000 feet from the end of the runway. But the relief was brief. Even though the landing was over, the danger wasn't fully gone. The crew had done everything they could, but they knew the full extent of the damage wouldn't be clear until the plane stopped completely. What would the investigation reveal? Would they find more damage than expected? And could it have been avoided? The tension was still thick in the air as emergency crews rushed to the scene. The mystery of what really happened on that flight was far from over. What did they miss in the heat of the moment? And was there something else that could have gone wrong during those final seconds of landing? The aftermath. No fire, no injuries. The aircraft had finally come to a complete stop, its wheels firmly planted on the runway. The emergency teams, poised and ready, rushed toward the plane. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, but as the minutes passed, the tension that had gripped the cockpit and cabin began to lift. There was no fire. No one was injured. The passengers, still shaken, slowly realized they had made it through the harrowing ordeal. It was a miracle that everyone was safe. Despite the sparks and flames that had erupted from the nose gear during the landing, the aircraft had held together. The decision to burn off the excess fuel by circling for over 2 hours had paid off. It was a decision made in the heat of the moment, but it was the right one. Without it, the outcome could have been far more. As the passengers began to deplane, they could hardly believe the chaos they had just witnessed was over. Many of them still felt the adrenaline rushing through their veins, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had seen the sparks and flames on live TV, heard the uncertainty in the air, and wondered if they would ever land safely. But now, their feet were on solid ground. The crew members, too, were relieved. They knew that their decision to divert to LAX, despite the risks, had been the key to ensuring a safe landing. But even as the tension eased, a sense of unease lingered. The technical failure that had caused the emergency was still unexplained. What had gone wrong? Why had the nose gear malfunctioned? While there were no immediate answers, the investigation was already underway. As the aircraft was carefully examined and the black box recordings analyzed, investigators would begin to piece together what had happened. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. Would the investigation reveal a fatal flight mistake? Or was there something else at play that had yet to be uncovered? The passengers and crew had survived a near disaster, but the true cause of the incident remained a mystery. The path before them lay unsure. For so long it had been literally nearly deserted. The name for it, and the search for answers, was just beginning. The investigation, after the plane had safely landed and the passengers had disembarked, the weight of the situation was far from over. Behind the scenes, a team of experts from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, sprang into action. Their job was to figure out exactly what had gone wrong. They had one mission: to uncover the cause of the nose landing gear failure that had nearly ended in disaster. The investigation began with a detailed examination of the aircraft. Every part of the plane was carefully inspected, but the team quickly focused on the damage was clear, but no one could immediately explain why the gear had failed in the first place. After days of intense work, investigators made a crucial discovery. The cause of the failure was something nobody had anticipated. The nose landing gear had failed because of fractured anti-rotation lugs. These small but crucial parts had been slowly weakening over time, hidden from view and undetectable during routine maintenance checks. The fractures were tiny, almost impossible to see, but they were enough to cause the catastrophic failure during the emergency landing. The revelation sent shockwaves through the aviation community. No one had realized that something so seemingly small could bring an aircraft to the brink of disaster. The anti-rotation lugs were supposed to keep the nose gear stable during landing, but when they fractured, they caused the gear to shift in a way that made a normal landing almost impossible. It was a failure that no one had seen coming, and it could have happened on any flight. In the days that followed, Airbus released an engineering bulletin to address the issue. The company warned all operators to inspect their planes for similar defects, and to replace any faulty lugs. The message was clear. This hidden flaw could cause serious incidents in the future. The investigation had uncovered a deadly flaw, and now steps were being taken to prevent it from happening again. But the bigger question remained: how had this issue gone undetected for so long? As the investigation continued, experts dug deeper, looking for any signs of systemic failure within the manufacturing process. They began to uncover details that suggested possible lapses in quality control, errors that could have left the problem unnoticed for years. Just when authorities thought they had the full story, a new clue emerged that would change everything. Could there have been more to the story than just a simple mechanical? The legacy. Passengers remember the day the emergency landing was over and they were safe. But the event was far from forgotten. The incident quickly made headlines, with news outlets worldwide reporting on the dramatic rescue that had unfolded on Flight 2034. For many of the passengers, the memories of that day would stay with them forever. As the aircraft came to a stop on the runway, most of the passengers exhaled in unison, relief flooding over them. But for many, it wasn't just the landing that they would never forget. It was the uncertainty, the fear that the plane could have easily gone off course, or that the landing gear could have failed altogether. For hours, they had been on edge, watching their flight make slow circles in the sky, waiting for the emergency to end. What made it even more surreal was the fact that the whole world was watching with them. It was when the plane landed that they felt the greatest level of anxiety they had ever experienced. The incident had become the subject of live broadcasts, with news stations covering every minute of the flight's descent. Viewers at home watched in horror as the plane came closer to the runway, unsure of what would happen next. People around the world had their eyes glued to the screen, praying for the passenger's safe return to the ground. It felt like a moment that could go either way, and it wasn't just the crew who were holding their breath. For those on board, it was a mix of relief and disbelief. The landing, though tense and full of danger, had been successful. But that success didn't erase the anxiety built up during the hours spent in the air. The passengers knew just how fragile air travel could be, and for many, it was a wake-up call that aviation safety isn't something to take for granted. As the passengers exited the plane, many couldn't stop talking about the experience. Some were still in shock. Others felt a deep sense of gratitude for the crew's Yet no one could shake the feeling that they had just experienced something extraordinary. But the most haunting thought remained. What if the plane hadn't made it? What if the landing gear had failed earlier? Would the outcome have been the same? These questions lingered in the minds of the passengers, who would forever carry the memory of that day, and while the world moved on, the experience left an undeniable mark on everyone involved, passengers and crew alike. The legacy of that flight would stay not just as a news story, but as a reminder of the dangers of air travel. And for the survivors, it served as a constant reminder of just how precious life is, especially when you're up in the air. As the investigation continued, another troubling discovery was made. The shock absorber had incorrect pressure. This was due to a mistake during maintenance, when the aircraft's weight was still on the shock absorber, making it hard to get the right pressure. The solution was simple. When servicing the shock absorber, the nose gear must be properly jacked up to remove any weight. Here's your closing line with proper punctuation added for clarity and flow. Thank you for watching. If you thought this aviation story was as exciting as we did, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. We love hearing from you. So leave a comment and let us know what